All right, so your job is to make sure this is always bouncing and that that's always counting.
Gotcha.
Got it? Otherwise, we're in trouble. Yeah. I'm going to move this over here. This is really good stuff. I've never actually done a class on kind of TRR, and I was pretty excited about it. That's all I was working through. And this week,
That sounds like an exciting subject.
yeah, well, it's like, it's not, right? And so, but I'm going through it, and I'm like, God, there's so much to this process that people skim over or don't know about or get lazy with. And it, you know, inspections and TRRs, oh man, I forgot to update the, supposed to say TRRs. So there's so many things that people like skim over, don't know about, and inspections are the number one thing that causes contracts to bust. And part of it's because of the house, part of it's because people don't set expectations, but part of it's because you just get off on the wrong foot when negotiating TRRs. Not relationally with the other agent or the buyer or the seller, just like the whole thing is such a fragile little process. And if you screw one thing up, it can be catastrophic to the whole process. So as I was going through it, I was like, gosh, yeah, this is important. This is important. This is how you should think about it. This is how you should talk about it. You know, this kind of stuff. So it is good stuff. So getting started with the kind of TRR process. So set the tone for the TRR negotiations. You never want to just send an email or send a text. When you're negotiating with an agent, the agent needs to be on your side. We need to be on a team when we're negotiating. We talked about this in our negotiating class several months ago. It is never me versus you in a negotiation with the other agent or the buyer or the seller. You've got to be on the same team as the other agent. So sometimes you might send over something and they just get real defensive right off the bat. You've got to defuse that process. There's a couple tactics you can use to do that. But if there's any kind of, if you're not on the same team trying to solve problems, the deal's done. If one agent is trying to fight the other agent, deal's done. Because all that other client's getting is hostility. If you're the buyer agent, that seller is only getting hostility from that listing agent. And so everything we do or say is us being unreasonable or whatever, right? So you have to get on the same page and you have to set the tone with the other agent as you go through. And sometimes that's like calling out the negative, like, hey, I know this seems like a huge list of stuff. I know this seems like a bunch of unreasonable things. I know this might seem like we're just trying to, retrade during the, sometimes you can say these things to soften it, the reception of the TRR, but you have to set the tone and be on the same page as the other agent. Otherwise, it's doomed. Communication is everything. Be clear and concise. We'll talk about this in a minute, making sure everything you put in the document is incredibly clear and concise, so there's no interpretation. It is very clear what needs to be done. Sending images and copies of the photos and stuff is awesome too. But don't just send stuff over in an email. Everything you send to anyone, a client, the other realtor, whoever, you should call them, verbally discuss it first, and then send an email with what you discussed. It's the number one way to communicate with everything. There are so many moving parts to this. Just shooting a TRR over to another agent and just saying they'll get it, is horrible because you can't set the tone for how they receive it. They're just going to receive it, and if they're already stressed out because there's a bunch of stuff going on, they're going to look at that and think, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. This is the last thing I need on my plate, right? And all this stuff. So over communicating is everything. Talking on the phone, very important during the TRR process. Some agents only want to text. Force people to get on phone calls. It's incredibly annoying, but when someone's only trying to text and you call and they don't answer and they text you back. So you have to have these conversations verbally. It's the only way to be clear and concise with what's going on. Going to the inspections, I was going to open this up to to discussion. Who thinks, hey, what's up? So a lot of people wonder, when you have an inspection, whose responsibility is it to be there? Traditionally speaking, it is the, hello, you're good, come in. When it comes to the inspections, traditionally it is the buyer agent's job to be at the inspection and the listing agent's job to be at the appraisal. That's traditionally how it works. It's their responsibility to open the door in those situations. However, it's not a bad idea for listing agents to be at the inspection. You just got to be real careful if you're going to be there. I don't ever like being there. if I'm the listing agent, to be at the inspection, because I'm the other side a little bit, and anything I say they're going to take with a grain of salt. So if you are there, you need to be quiet and just be helpful. Don't even just be there as a resource. That's it. And I know some agents say it's a duty to their seller to be there, so you can kind of hear the whole story, understand what's going on. The more you know about a situation, the more you can influence it through a negotiation process. So being there and seeing the buyer's face as they go through the inspection report is an incredibly valuable tool. If you can be there at the end of the inspection, being there at the beginning to say hello and talk to them and find out if they have any concerns, if they have any thoughts. The more you know about that other client, the more you can influence a negotiation process. So not a bad thing to be there. However, what I see is most agents there, the inspector will say something and the listing agent's like, that's not a big deal. It's like, I don't care what you think. Like, stop telling me, like, all I think is you're just trying to save this deal now. Like, be quiet and let us do our thing. And then I'll come to you when I have questions about it. So if you're gonna be a listing agent at an inspection process, your job is to be quiet and observe. That's it. Anything you say is going to be held against you in the negotiation process, right? So don't say anything at all. All you're doing is asking for clarification, but just the less you say, the better. You're there to observe and watch their communication with their inspector, with their buyer, all that stuff. Because sometimes when you get a TRR, you just get a list of like 9 things. And you don't know that really 6 of them aren't a big deal, and one of them's a huge deal to that buyer. But if I'm there and I see the conversation, I know this one thing's a huge deal to that buyer, and it helps my negotiation. So listing agents beat at the inspection is not a bad idea. You just got to be careful and make sure you're not hurting yourself by being there. You can actually learn a lot by being there. But traditionally, just the buyer agent's the one who shows up to the inspection. Never argue. I've been goaded into some arguments sometimes on accident. I have to catch myself and be like, it happened this morning, where I was kind of going back and forth. I'm like, this is not productive. I had to like stop the conversation, and I didn't say anything rude. I backed up and I stopped and I changed the topic. I think it was Benjamin Franklin said, no one's ever won an argument. Even if you win, you lose, because the other person's mad at you now, especially if you actually win it, right? So arguing never helps anyone. You want to seek to understand the other side, what they're trying to do. Ask questions. Don't try to say that's not true, that's wrong, that's not important. Ask why is that important to them. Seek to understand their view, and then we can help influence the situation once we understand what their viewpoint, or once we understand what's driving them. Because a lot of times what they say, there's actually maybe a few layers deep of why that's important to them, not just because they might be asking for the silly thing to be fixed. And we might say, no, it's dumb, it doesn't need to be fixed. But if we ask questions, we can find out that their dad owned a house 20 years ago and this thing wasn't fixed and it ended up causing this problem or this problem or this problem. And if we know that, that's a different objection to overcome than fix this thing. Does that make sense? So if you feel yourself disagreeing on something, seek to understand, and that's going to give you more options in fixing the problem. But never argue. I used to, again, when I was young in my negotiating career and as an agent, I would try to tell people, like, that's not important. Like, every house has that. You don't need this. You don't need to do these things. And it's like, you're not going to convince anybody, especially the other side of the negotiation. So never argue. If you feel it getting into an argument, change topics, or just, there are some agents out there, unfortunately, that can get aggressive. I think if they have an emotional immaturity or an experience, emotion comes out, and they start getting argumentative or raising their voice, and it happens all the time. And so I've had to tell people to stop yelling at me. And so it's okay to stop it, but don't get goaded into it. Stop the conversation, stop it, reel it back in, whatever. But you'll never win an argument, so don't ever fall into that. Okay. So the number one thing I'm always going to say about anything to make your job and your life easier and make you better at your job is to set expectations. Everything you do, we should be setting expectations to our clients, to the other realtors, to our family members, everything. The more everyone understands what's happening, the less spooked they get, the less frustrated they get, the less everything. The more compliant everyone is if you set expectations. And again, talking about buyers or sellers, especially buyers going through the inspection process, it's like walking through a haunted house. It's like, if I don't know when the skeleton's going to pop out behind the corner, it startles me, right? And I act irrationally and emotionally. But if I know someone's going to pop out from behind this corner or something's here or whatever, it's not scary anymore. So if you can set expectations with your clients, it takes the fear out of the next step. That wasn't mine, was it? Okay, I think I turned mine on focus. So, so setting expectations is everything. So how we set expectations with buyers as we go into a TRR. So again, I was having this conversation with an agent yesterday. The TRR is kind of blowing up. The sellers didn't fix things to the buyer's liking, and now it's kind of blown up, and she wanted help saving it. And I kind of, in my head, I'm thinking it's probably too far gone, and we didn't do the things right up front to save it now. And so if you're having these conversations properly up front, it makes the negotiations easier when you actually get to the repairs. So this is what we say to every buyer and every seller as well, but every buyer is, hey, we're about to have inspections. During the inspection process, the home inspector is going to turn this house upside down, looking for everything that is not functioning as it was originally intended. So the window that kind of sticks, it's going to be on the report. The toilet that wobbles, the fan that wobbles, the door that kind of sticks, everything's going to be on this report. They're going to turn it upside down. So it's going to look like a ton of stuff. But really what we're looking for is 5 major things. This is really all we're looking for in a home inspection. It's the roof, the foundation, the heating and air, the plumbing, and the electric. Those are the 5 main systems of a house. And these are the 5 things that if they're fixed, or if they're in disrepair, they're expensive to repair, so we want to make sure they're covered. But it's reasonable that every other buyer is going to want these 5 things fixed as well. So it's reasonable for us to ask for it because everyone else is going to ask for it as well. Everything else is what we call deferred maintenance. It's stuff that the homeowner should have done over time but didn't, and it's a handyman type job. It's stuff that you can do on the weekend, or it's deferred maintenance. It's little things, right? You know, it could be a bunch of $150 projects, but none of them are huge and they're going to catastrophic to the home's functionality, right? These things are what make a home, right? Electricity, plumbing, heating and air, roof, and foundation. So these things are all we care about. So the other piece is what I like to say is, in a home this old or in a home this size, regardless of the size, it's not unreasonable to see, you know, up to $7,000 in just items on your report. That doesn't mean we're going to fix everything. Doesn't mean we have to fix everything. But on a home this old or on a home of this size, it's not unreasonable to see something like that. And so you're kind of setting a benchmark. You're kind of anchoring in there, because right now it's not happened yet. So we're just talking about it. So it's okay. And then if it happens, it's like, okay, well, Brett said it might be like this, so it's nothing to freak out about. But if I don't say that, and then a report comes back and there's like $7,000 worth of stuff, they're going to think, holy crap, I don't have $7,000. What are we going to do with this? So it's all about setting the expectations on the front end, right? So these are the 2 things I like to say. We're only focusing on 5 things. Everything else is deferred maintenance. It's handyman jobs. It's weekend jobs. And then on a house this old or on a house this size, it's not uncommon to see $5,000 to $7,000 worth of stuff pop up. But really every house has stuff. Really all we care about is those 5 things. And if we care about all that stuff, maybe we go look at a new construction home. If we really just can't live with all this deferred maintenance, maybe we go look at a new construction home. So that's the expectation needs to be set with a buyer. With a seller going into an inspection, same thing. I like to advise my sellers just like I like to advise my buyers so that we're all on the same page. Because I don't want some stuff to come in and the seller like, I don't want to fix that. I want to explain to them, hey, if one of these 5 things is not functioning, we really got to lean into it because every other buyer is going to want it. A lot of times we have to update disclosures if some of these things have disrepair. So these are kind of major items that we really have to do something about. So I have the exact same conversation. Inspections are coming up. Home inspector's going to come through here and just completely turn this house upside down, and you've lived here for 7 years, and then you're going to be like, holy cow, how is there this much wrong with my house? And I've lived here forever and nothing's wrong with it. But they're just looking for everything that is not functioning the day it was built, right? So there's going to be a ton of stuff. So really all we care about as the seller, what we're going to pay attention to is roof, foundation, heating and air, plumbing, and electric. Everything else, if there's not much and they ask for some other stuff, maybe we can help. If it's an easy fix, maybe we can help. But we're not going to be too concerned about fixing some of the deferred maintenance. We're going to be really concerned about the main functions. So I'm setting that expectation with the sellers too. And then I always try to set the expectation. Buyers always ask for more than they want or need. It's a negotiation process. Just like when we accepted an offer, they offered less than they would actually agree to. Same thing happens with the repairs. They're going to throw stuff on there that's a nice to have, but when it comes down to it, we can get away with not doing it. So setting that expectation, because again, when a seller who loves their home and they've lived there for 5 or 10 years and I've never had any problem with any of this, and they see this list of stuff that's wrong with their home, they get upset. They might not act like it, but they get upset. So set that expectation that they're going to ask us for stuff. We don't have to do everything. We can negotiate it, but really these 5 things are what we need to focus on. Because you don't want one of these 5 things to come up and they'd be like, I don't want to do that. So we kind of have to set the expectation. And again, I can have these bad news conversations up front before it's real, when it's hypothetical, and they're like, okay, yeah, makes sense. If I don't have that conversation and then all this stuff pops up and I'm telling them, hey, you got to fix this, they're like, oh, you just want to sell the house so you can get a commission. No, it's because everyone's going to want it. And I should have told you up front, but so it's much harder to have after the situation than before the situation. You might have heard me say, if you do it properly and set expectations, it makes your negotiations easier. If you don't, then you have what's called commission breath. If anyone heard of that, you'll say anything to get this deal done. So it's like, yeah, you got to fix this. You should pay this. You should give them this. You should do this just to get this deal done. And that you don't want that. That's one of the number one things that drives consumers crazy, is when you start telling them to spend a ton of money to get a deal done. I think I have another, I'll say it now because I can't remember if I wrote it down anywhere else, but when you start getting into a negotiation and the buyer or the seller is having to concede money or spend money, you always want to give them permission to say no. And so, because I'm advising you, my job is to advise you to get this deal closed. If at any point you're not comfortable with what we're doing or the amount of money you're spending, stop me. And I know it's really easy for me to spend your money, and I'm trying to get the deal done, so stop me at any time if you're not comfortable, if we're going too fast. And so you give them permission to stop you, and you let them know that, hey, my job is to get this thing to the finish line. And so it's your job to stop me if we're not comfortable. Does that make sense? So when you can say that, it gives them permission to stop you if they're not comfortable, but it also lets them know what your goal is, what I'm trying to do, is to get the deal done. And so when you can do that, it puts them in the driver's seat, but it also kind of levels the playing field. Like, what do we, I'm not just trying to force you to do this. You hired me to get this deal done. That's what I'm trying to do. And you stop me if we're not comfortable with anything. So it just kind of puts everyone on the same expectation, the same, so we all know what's going on. So these are the 2 conversations you need to have: expectation setting on the front end before the inspection ever happens, so that your TRR process is easier. Does that make sense? Any questions on these conversations or anything like that? Very, 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 very important. You should have this conversation with your buyer 3 times at least before the inspection ever happens. That has to be beat into their head. Okay, writing the TRR. So one big thing, I have a lot of agents always ask me, like, here's the report, what should we ask for? And it's not as easy as me looking at a report and telling you what to put on it. There's a couple things that go into it. So this is what I've created for my own kind of framework to how to fill out a TRR. So picking what goes on the TRR. So it's kind of 3 things you want to put into that, and everyone knows what a Venn diagram is, right? So there are all the things on the TRR that are safety and security items. Maybe a door that the lock's broken, windows are broken, electricity that has like a short wire, whatever. Safety, security issues are in this bucket over here. Market norms. So this is like, hey, in 2021, if you ask me to fix my toilet that's loose, no, I'll put it back on the market. Someone else will buy it tomorrow, right? So there's market norms of like, no one else is going to ask for this. We can ask, but they're just going to tell us to buzz off and put it back on the market, right? It's not reason, it's unlikely that other buyers are going to require this, right? So there's market norms, what you're seeing in the market or what we're seeing other agents and buyers do. And there's buyer sensitivities. So this is going to be, like I talked about earlier, Dad bought a house 20 years ago and the roof leaked, and now every roof is not good enough for me and my dad, and so we have to be triple sure this roof's good. So if there's something, sometimes some people had the last house I owned, the sewer line backed up. So I want to scope the sewer line and make sure it's 1,000%. If it's not 1,000% good, I want it addressed. Those are buyer sensitivities. To that buyer, it's more important to other buyers. Does that make sense? So these are the 3 things you want to look at. Market norm, when I'm figuring out what I put on there. So if it is, what did I say? If an item on the inspection report is all 3 of these, and it's in this middle, it goes on the TRR. If it's 2 or 3 of them, then maybe you consider including it. If it's a buyer norm or if it's a market norm, maybe we consider including it, but we don't die on that hill. But if it has all 3, that's something we want to put on there to make sure of. that all kind of make sense? So again, you look at a report, there's going to be, there'll be 50 to 150 line items of stuff to put on there. And a lot of it is just, again, if I went down the street, every single house in this neighborhood would have 30 of these things on them as well. So we're not going to really care about that because that's just kind of a sunk cost. That's an assumed risk when you're buying a home. These are just houses, age. But you don't want to be insensitive to the buyer's sensitivities. Because if they say, I care a lot about this, you can't say it's not a big deal, don't do it. Because that creates a tremendous amount of liability for you. Because if something goes wrong in a year, guess whose fault it was? So you have to be sensitive to their sensitivities. They have to feel heard in any negotiation. They have to feel heard, even if we don't get what they wanted. They have to feel like they've been heard in their concern. And then safety security items are just reasonable to request, reasonable to ask for. And typically buyers or sellers receive safety security things as well. If there's some kind of fire risk, if there's some kind of gas lines that are not properly bonded, can explode, stuff like that. There's things that are like, okay, I've lived here for 10 years and we haven't exploded, but whatever. But normally these things are going to be received well by the seller. And so this is kind of how, and again, I explain this when I explain this to buyers. This is how we're going to design this thing when we pick all these things on the list. So you go through, I'm going to go through it and identify these two. You go through it and kind of identify these. We're going to come back together. We're going to put it on a TRR. We're going to ask for it. So we're not just asking for silly stuff, but we're asking for stuff that we really care about and that we can justify in a discussion. So this is kind of how I put a TRR together. Does this all make sense? Anyone ever seen anything like this or had any kind of, this is, I tried to systematize this process a while back, and this is kind of what I've always taught it. Okay, writing the TRR also. Language to use in the TRR, and I'm going to go through an example here in a second. Be organized, clear, and concise. I'll show you how I design my TRRs, and it's easy to look at, read, interpret, and segment. It's just the way I design mine. But communications use, be very clear and concise about what you say. Use item numbers and language from the inspection. Don't just say fix leak under sink. Tell them what sink, what room it's in, what sink it's in, what the problem is, what the fix is. Use language directly from the inspection report and photos from the inspection report as well. So the more concise and clear what you're asking for is, the less likelihood it gets misinterpreted or it doesn't get fixed properly or it doesn't get fixed at all. So require licensed professionals when necessary. If we're dealing with anything that requires an actual license, trade license, like electrical, HVAC, or plumbing, you always want to have a licensed person do it. I lean on that sometimes, depending on what it is. If someone needs to change out a P-trap, you don't need to pay $300 for a licensed plumber to come do that. Your guy can do that for $100. It's a P-trap. If you mess it up, the repercussions aren't huge. If we're putting in a new electrical panel or a new sewer line or something like that, new water line, the repercussions are more important, or it's a bigger issue if they do it wrong. So, but as a general rule of thumb, thank you. As a general rule of thumb, you want to, if it's a licensed trade, specify that you want a licensed professional to do it. And then a properly filled out TRR. So let's look at this. Where am I? Oh man. All right, I'm gonna kind of go through the whole thing. So the TRR form changed, beginning of this year? January of 25. It's now 2 pages and it's more complicated, but it works. So address. So now there's a section if you're just not gonna submit a TRR, because used to compliance people and brokerages, even if there was as is, they're like, I need a TRR. Well, there's no TRR negotiation, I don't need it. So they would force agents to put nothing, buyers asking for nothing, and then sign it, and then So now they just have a box, no TRR. So if you're going to ask for stuff, you check box 2. And then 2A is asking about termites. Is treatment required or treatment not required? I'm not sure why they break that out, but they do. So if there is termites and it needs to be treated, you click yes. If there's not, click no. And then this is kind of how I like to word and like mine to look. So I break out each section. I break out each section, and then I call in, it's kind of small, I don't know if you can read it, but the roof stuff is here, the electrical stuff is here, the plumbing stuff's here, HVAC's here, interior, if there was appliances, whatever, it's all going to be separated. Each one has the number, section 431, so you can pull up the inspection report and see exact images of the thing I'm asking you to repair. It asks for a licensed electrician to replace this, licensed electrician to replace or repair or replace, licensed plumber, licensed HVAC technician. So it's asking for the right people to do it. It's giving clear descriptions from the report that you can pull to and see. It's got item numbers so you can go pull photos from the report. It's going to create as much certainty in what we're asking for as possible. And this is what's going to make the communication clearer. If someone just says fix this and they go look at, they're not sure which image, what image you're talking about, how can a seller make a decision? How can a buyer make a decision? They don't problem is buyer probably doesn't even know really what they're asking for. So the more detail, the more higher probability they know exactly what they're doing, the more likely it's going to be a cleaner negotiation. And then the buyer signs here when they submit it. Page 2 is the seller's response. So the seller can either accept all the things that you asked for, or they can modify it, and it kind of acts like a counteroffer to the TRR. And then they put the things that they're not going to do. So just like counteroffers for contracts, if they don't address it, then they're agreeing to it. Does that make sense? Buyer shall be forced unless modified below. So, and if they don't, like if I say repair the roof and they put a bunch of other stuff but don't say anything about the roof, it means they're agreeing to it. So this is a counteroffer to the TRR, just like anything else. Yeah. So this is where you would put, I'm not going to fix the roof, if you're not going to fix the roof. So it's just like a counteroffer. And then the seller signs it when they send it back to the buyer. And this is where the buyer can agree to the seller's modified TRR. And then this last section is, if you are buying it as is, the buyer just comes down here and signs this, and the seller doesn't have to sign it. The buyer's just acknowledging, I'm buying it as is, I'm not going to submit a TRR, and we're good. So
You would still click the top box.
I think so. Was there a difference between no TRR and as is? No treatments, repair replacements, and connection. I think this is if I inspect it and I'm not going to ask for anything.
Okay.
The bottom is I'm just taking it as is. Because this still applies to the treatments, repairs, and replacements paragraph of the contract, and this one says it's just buying it as is.
Okay.
But you can check it.
Can
I mean,
we-
yeah.
I guess it's maybe slightly different than how I'm, once again, from a different state doing it, but when you say where the seller's response, really, so if we're, like you said, if we're not wanting the roof, you're like, hey, I'll do everything but the roof, then all I would put in that spot is I would say.
Seller not to repair
seller
roof.
not correcting the issue with the roof.
Yeah,
or whatever.
that is.
Oh.
Is that what you've been, or is you seeing?
Everyone's been doing it kind of differently.
That's the
So I've seen a
problem.
lot of people still
Do they
it
just
the old
rewrite?
way.
They just rewrite it exactly, but
Yeah.
different.
Right.
I was
Okay.
gonna say-
Or this way.
I
I've
was
seen
gonna
that
say,
way.
the way I've always done it is if, okay, so you have your list up there, you have your roof, you have your plumbing, and then the seller's saying, okay, I will, and it'll say seller will, blah, blah, blah with the roof, seller will with plumbing, but if I don't put it on that spot, then I'm not agreeing to anything else.
Okay.
So it sounds like it's the.
It's opposite. My understanding is that it's opposite because again, it says all other treatments, repairs, and replacements requested by buyer shall be enforced unless modified below. So if you don't modify it below, you're agreeing to it above.
Okay.
So it's just like a counteroffer. Everything's agreed to except for what I change. So if
So you only put the things you do not agree to.
correct.
And I've
Okay.
seen people just to like cover their sellers, they're like, this is what we're agreeing to,
And this is what we're not agreeing
and
to.
these are the repair, and none of the other repairs.
Yeah,
Or-
to be
or they'll
clear.
strike it out still.
So that's what I do. I mean, the old way was easier. It's just one box. If you didn't want to do it, you struck it out and initialed it, and you added stuff. It was messy as hell,
Yeah.
but it was clearer.
Right.
This, yeah, it can be interpreted different ways. But again, I think
Okay.
unless
I mean, it does
modified
sound
below,
like that.
yeah,
I just want to make sure I'm understanding that.
yeah,
So
yeah. So it's not like this
completely
isn't.
opposite of what I'm used to.
This isn't the seller saying, okay, here's what I agree to. It's here's the things I want to modify.
This is what I'm modifying.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
Yeah. Again, it's like, I think it's much more confusing the way they do it now. But I don't know, maybe not. Maybe it's only because I've been doing it one way for 12 years. So this is kind of, again, the main thing is the cleaner you can make a TRR, the more detail you put around what you're asking for, the more you break it up. And because when I do my TRRs, I like to, I can, thank you. Still recording?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a third responsibility.
Yeah, I know. Appreciate you.
Stacking them on.
Yeah. So when I'm a seller of a property, when I have investment property or my own property, whatever, I get this report and I send it to my contractor. I'm like, give me bids on these things. Send him the report and I send him the TRR. So with the report and the TRR, he can give me a bid. He doesn't have to go out normally. He can look at it and give me a bid on what they're trying to do. And so that's why I like it. I send this and so my HVAC guy knows to look at the HVAC. But I've seen some people put a roof issue, an interior issue, a foundation issue, then another roof issue, then a plumbing and the electrical, then another plumbing issue. It's like they're just thinking of stuff as they type it out. Like, create some organization in this thing so it's easy and clear and concise for a seller to make a decision. The easier you can make it for a seller to just say yes or no or this or that, the better. But I've looked at TRRs. I've had to read them 10 times to figure out exactly what we're looking at or what we're asking for. And I think it's because the buyer agent is not educating their client and being clear in their communication what they're asking for. So very important. The cleaner this is, the more received it's going to be from by the seller. So I think it's very important to have that. Questions on filling this out? That's a good question. I know you're not alone. I know you did it different in another state, but I guarantee people are doing it all types of ways.
I'll quit bringing that other state up.
You'll forget all about it soon.
Yeah, hopefully.
Oh man, where'd it go? Okay. Buy-side duties prior to the TRR. So again, this is a whole process. So after the inspections, don't ask the seller to inspect their own house. This is a pet peeve of mine. If you inspect the house and then you, on a TRR, you put seller to have licensed electrician come out and evaluate, seller to have licensed plumber come out and evaluate this, seller to have HVAC technician to come out and evaluate this, you're inspecting the house, not me. You tell me what you want me to fix. I'm not going to go inspect my own house. That infuriates me. And so I always push back immediately. If you think a plumber needs to come out and evaluate it, you get a plumber out and evaluate it. You don't want my guy to go look at it. You want your guy to go look at it. So as a buyer agent, don't just say, because inspectors will say all the time, have licensed electrician evaluate electrical panel. And they'll put that on there. What does that mean? Like, you evaluate it, you see if there's a risk, then you tell me what it is and we'll talk about fixing it. So this is a pet peeve of mine. It's infuriating to me. Don't ask the seller to inspect their own house. Your job to inspect the house. Same thing. Seller to have foundation company inspect their foundation. No. You hire the foundation company. You go get it inspected. This is your inspection period, not mine. So that's where, again, you can't be this aggressive to the other agent when it comes across, but that's how I feel is like, you do it, you know? Like, why, I'm not going to do your job. So
How do you respond to that then?
I would just say, sellers don't want to inspect their own house. If you want to get a foundation company out,
You want a
Here's-
seller to
here's a
honestly
couple of
knock
good ones.
Their own house down, like, oh,
Well,
Let me tell you all the
they're going to call their buddy.
Yeah.
You want their buddy to come out and take a look at it?
Fred said there's no
Yeah,
problem.
yeah, that's right. Uncle Fred's an engineer. So like, that's just like, they're gonna call someone, but I would recommend you guys getting your own. So I'd push back, and sometimes they say no, and sometimes like I'll walk away if you don't do it, and we'll talk about it. But I always push back initially because it's But as a buyer agent, this is their duty. This is your job to do these things. It's to get the buyer to inspect the home. I like to get rough estimates on them while I'm waiting for the seller. I'll send it, and then I like to go talk to my guys and figure out what I think. Because the easiest negotiation in a TRR is cash in lieu of repairs. If we can just say, hey seller, I'll give you $5,000, you fix it all, and me, the seller's out of it, it's always gonna be the cleanest thing. Always, always, always. You'll hit closing on time, there won't be a fight. The conversation I was having earlier is the seller made a bunch of repairs and the buyer didn't like them, and now the buyer wants out. Not only that, but the buyer thinks, oh, this guy is a cheap guy who hides problems and is gonna screw me a month when I get in the house is gonna fall inside on me. That's what the buyer thinks now. When if we had just said, hey, why don't you just give us the $5,000 and we'll fix it, the house would have closed. So one decision, potentially busted this contract. So get your own repairs, get your own estimates. Because if if Uncle Johnny, the HVAC technician, says HVAC's fine, and we reach out and the guy's like, yeah, you really need to do this, it could cost this or this or this. Well, now we have another opinion. We're not just relying on some guy the seller asked, right? Because I'd like to think most people out there are honest, but some people are in tight spots and they lie. So do your due diligence as well. So I like to start doing my own investigations on the repairs as the buyer agent before they tell us what they'll do. And I have an idea what I'm asking them to do. If we're asking them to fix $2,000 worth of things, that's different than if it's a $10,000 or $15,000 group of things, right? One's more reasonable, and one we can maybe concede on. So it's just two different scenarios. So I like to have an idea of from my guys or our trusted guys what a repair might be. So get your own, understand, it helps you understand in the negotiation process what you're asking for, and it protects your buyer so they don't just get taken advantage of by the seller's friend who's an electrician or whatever. Delivering the TRR. So just like I said earlier, don't just email it. Dear listing agent, see attached TRR, and that's it. I like to call them before I email it. If they don't answer, say, please call me back, working on the TRR, wanted to chat with you. When they call back, I talk to them. And I explain exactly what's going on, right? And I'll talk about those buyer sensitivities. I'll talk about safety and security. I'll explain why these things are on here. And then we're not just trying to retrade and get a lower price, right? These are things, why we're asking for these things. Never come out in the first TRR and ask for money. I think that looks like you're just trying to retrade and make money. If the first TRR I get is seller to give buyer $10,000, that feels like a money grab. Tell me what's worth $10,000 that you think needs to fix. And then let's talk about those. Then we'll determine what the money is associated with them. But I see people send that in the first TRR. And I think that's lazy. Tell them what we want, then let's talk money after. Yeah.
If you send a repair estimate with it, what did you like send a repair estimate?
Yeah. So if you've done it, yeah, so that's a little different, right? So if you've got the bids and you're like, yeah, I'll just do it myself. Here are my bids. Here's what I want done. And then I could say, well, I don't want to give you the $10,000 because your bid includes this, this, and this. So then we could talk. But yeah, if there's something to point to, that's a little different. Just a line that says seller to pay buyer X dollars is a little more like, again, it feels like you're just trying to claw back some money. So I always like to come in with stuff first and explain that as an option. We're going to ask for these things. It'd be great for them to fix it. Sometimes it's better for us to just get money and fix it ourselves so we know it's done right. And the client I was talking to earlier said, I don't really want to take on the project of fixing their problems. And I understand that, but this is going to be your house. And you want to make sure it's done properly. Yeah, you want to make sure it's done properly because you're the one that's going to have to deal with it. So I know you want to take on their problems, but you want to make sure it's done right. And that's more important if you're going to move forward with this house. So in a house, I say this all the time to buyers, it's made by man, it's imperfect, it breaks, it can be fixed by man with enough money and time, anything in the world can be fixed. So don't freak out, let's just talk about it. If there's a $20,000 fix, if we can get the seller to agree to $20,000, let's just fix it. It's like everything's fixable. So just to kind of keep people at the negotiating table, it's like everything's fixable. Let's just ask for it. They might say yes. So talk to the buyer agent or talk to the seller's agent every time before you send a TRR and kind of set the narrative. If I just send them a list of 12 things, that seller agent's gonna be like, that's stupid, that's not necessary, this is dumb, and they're not knowing why or what we're putting on there. And if I can explain it first, then they get it, then they can go explain it. Remember when we talked about negotiating a couple months ago, whatever you tell the other agent, there's a 90% chance they're gonna turn right around and tell their client. So you're defending your client and validating their wants and needs to that listing agent. That listing agent can turn around and validate it to the seller. Does that make sense? So you want to set the narrative, explain what's happening in this TRR, and it'll be much more well received by the listing agent and by the seller. Questions on that? I know I always keep going back to you have to have verbal conversations during this process. During negotiations and during TRR negotiations, you have to talk on the phone to your clients and to the other agent. If we're talking about showings and whatever, text, email, all you want. But if we're negotiating, I have to talk on the phone to you. Have to. Too much is lost in a text message. Too much can be gained in a phone call. You have to have a phone call. So list side duties after receiving the TRR. So the listing agent, don't just email it. Call and set the narrative to your client. I've seen clients I've seen realtors just email the TRR to their sellers. And it's just like, holy crap, man, you want to send someone off the edge. Like, let them read this thing. It's basically saying your house sucks. Give me 20 grand, right? So, yeah, how do you live in this thing? Fix it or I'm out. So they will receive it that way. It's an emotional process. So before I send any offers, before I send any counter offers, before I send any TRRs, I'm having a conversation first. Then I email it to them after I talk to them. I don't email it and then call them because they won't answer and they'll just pick it up and say, got your email, and then I have to call them and talk to them first so that they know what to expect by the time they open it up. Because I remember that used to happen to me all the time. I'd get an email that says TRR on 123 Main Street, my listing. I'm like, oh God, okay, fingers crossed it doesn't suck. I open it up, I look at it, I'm like, God, here we go. When if we'd had a conversation, if that buyer agent would have called me first and talked about it, we could have talked about it. And it wouldn't have been that reaction from me. So don't just email it to your seller. When you're the buying agent or the listing agent, don't just forward it along. Review it, look at it, call them. Call the other agent first to seek understanding. Hey, if they didn't call you, call them. Hey, I got your TR. Tell me about this. What are you thinking? What's important? Why'd they ask? Help me understand this problem. What's this mean? Get clarification, understand what they're asking for. Then call your seller and talk, then email it. Does that make sense? Have to control the narrative on all this. It's such a fragile process. You have to control everyone's thought process through this whole process. Properly explain next steps and options. So this is kind of, again, to that example I had this morning. The buyer wasn't aware that we could ask for money instead. She's like, oh, that wasn't presented to me. And so when you can properly explain, hey, here's what's going to happen. We're going to receive this, and then kind of here are our options. We agree to everything and fix it. We agree to half of it and fix it. We agree to money and let them do it. We fix 8, 1, 2, 3 and give them money for 4, 5, and 6. There's unlimited options of what we can do. So you kind of walk them through what next steps are. We get bids. We determine what we want. If something takes too long, it's going to take, the foundation company is backed up 4 weeks. Maybe we just give you money. You put it on the books. You fix it after closing. If something's going to be quick and easy, we have our guy do it. So we figure out what's easiest to get the deal done quicker. That's how you kind of explain next steps and options. So the seller's duties after receiving a TR. Don't start fixing anything. This has happened a couple times to me, even after I've told the clients not to do anything. We'll send them the TRR, send them the report, and then they're just handy guys, right? So they just start fixing stuff. And they didn't even ask us to fix it yet. Or we didn't agree on it yet. And then when we start negotiating, the buyer's like, okay, I don't really need that fixed. Well, he's like, well, I already fixed it. No one told you to do that. And now he's like, well, I already fixed this, so I don't want to do this. Like, no one told you to do that. You went off and started fixing things and spending money. Don't do anything until it's agreed to and signed. Because first time I made that mistake, I sent it to an investor. I sent the report. Because right after the inspection report, they sent me the report, and like 4 days later, they sent me the TRR. And in that 4 days, my guy had sent the inspection report to his contractor, and he was fixing the things he thought needed to be fixed. and they were not the same things that the buyer thought needed to be fixed. And so he's like, well, I already spent $1,800 doing this and this. And I was like, my bad. That was my fault for not explaining that to him. But I didn't realize that was my fault at the time. But that was my fault. The other thing, a seller, I tell my clients all the time, we're not going to make a decision right now. Sleep on it, because they're going to be hot when they get this. Because they already conceded, I already gave them $3,000 in closing or $8,000 in closing, already came off $3,000 on the price, already blah, blah, blah. And now there's this, and oh my God, sleep on it. We're not making any decisions right now. I wanted to get it in front of you, take a look at it, review it. Let me know if you have any questions. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Don't make any decisions the first time they see it, because they're always going to be hot right away. I always tell my clients to sleep on it. Get bids before responding. So according to the contract, once we receive the TRR, we have 7 days to negotiate it. That's a tight time frame to get a lot of bids, but if you're an agent, call me, call an agent, call someone. We have contractors bid. We can get stuff to you pretty quick if you know the right people. I don't usually like to negotiate. Sometimes I can now that I'm a little more knowledgeable on all the things, but I like to know what stuff costs before I start marketing it off the list. And if I like to have a conversation with the other agent, and through that conversation, I might learn that line item 2 and 3 and 4 are not that important to them, and line item 5 is. But if something costs $250 and I already have an HVAC guy going out there to fix this thing, and he can just fix this thing for an extra $100, like just leave it on there. Make them feel, make them feel like they've won, right? It's gonna cost us $100, not worth the fight. So there's a little bit to it. So kind of get bids, figure out what everything's gonna cost, because sometimes one guy can do 5 things on the list while he's there, and it's cheaper than having one guy come out 5 times and do it, right? So I like to get bids, know what we're talking about before we make our decision. It also makes your decision stronger. Kind of like Isaac said, is like if I have an invoice, it makes my negotiations a little stronger. I'm not just asking for money, we're not just guessing. I looked into it. So I like sellers and listing agents and sellers. And a lot of clients don't have contractors or HVAC guys or plumbing guys, or so they're going to rely on us sometimes. So I like to go out and get bids on some of the things before we make a decision. And that's what I tell my clients too, is like, this looks like a lot. Let's put it on paper. Let's see what it looks like financially, and then we can start making some decisions. But there's some things we can look at and be like, we can just cross off. Like, not going to do that. That's not necessary, or it's silly, or it's unrelated, whatever. But if you have conversations, if you were at the inspection and learned what's important to the buyer, and you had conversations with the buyer agent, you can know what's important, what's not. We talked for 10 minutes about this one thing, and he never mentioned this other thing that's on the list, but they put it on the list anyway. It's probably just something they put on there, right? Maybe it's not important because they didn't talk about it at all. So you can kind of figure out what you can take on and take off. Questions on this, kind of what to do on the sell side, on the list side? Okay, negotiating the TRR. So again, just kind of some tips, tricks when we're going back and forth. So we've talked about setting expectations. We've talked about preparing to write the TRR, how to write the TRR, how to present the TRR, how to receive the TRR, how to present it to the seller, and now we need to start negotiating it. Never argue. Again, I can't stress this enough. As real estate agents, we are paid to be the level-headed third party to help navigate this transaction. If we start getting emotional and arguing with each other, we are literally useless. Buyers and sellers can argue with each other without us and save a hell of a lot of money. So it's our job to keep everyone at the negotiating table, level-headed, doing what is fair and what's easiest to get the job done and make sure everyone win-win, right? So this is not your house. I'm not buying it and you're not selling it, right? Why are we yelling at each other? Tell me what your client's willing to do. I'll tell you what my client's willing to do. Like, this is not between me and you. And I've had to tell clients, this is not your house. That's why realtors who are, I said this last time, realtors who are representing a family or a friend are the worst realtors to deal with, because they have an emotional attachment to and it makes it harder for them to detach themselves. So never argue. I'm not the buyer, you're not the seller. We're just talking here. Tell me, how can we get this done? This is what happened in my situation I'm dealing with. Never let your client demonize the other side. If at any point, this is what happened, the buyer walked through, stuff wasn't done right, and they thought this buyer is cheap and they're just cutting corners and I'm gonna be left footing the bill, And if at any point one side demonizes the other side, the deal's done. It's entirely emotional. She loved the house. It was her dream house. First time home buyer, was in love with this thing. Now she didn't want anything to do with it. She's willing to give her earnest money away to get out of this contract. And it's because she's emotionally detached from the house and she thinks the seller is a crook. And you can't overcome that. There's no there's no way to overcome that. So the minute you let your client demonize the other side, they're done. They're detached from because I'm not going to deal with a crook, right? Just not going to do it. And so that's what happens. It stops being about the house and it starts being about principle, and you're done. Negotiation's done. So if you feel someone saying that, like he's trying to rip us off or they're being greedy or whatever, I don't think that's the case. They haven't said or done anything to lead me to believe they're doing this on purpose. Let me go find out why. Let me go ask this. Let me go, stop that reaction immediately and then go seek to understand why they made this decision. Does that make sense? But never let them, never say, yeah, sure, they're sure greedy, all right. You have to nip that in the bud, because once they get that in their head, negotiation's over. There's no middle ground anymore at that point. Because now it's good versus evil, it's right versus wrong, and I'm right and you're wrong, right? And there's no middle ground between those two. So can't let that ever happen. Always counter. We talked about this in the negotiating too. Never let a deal die in your court, right? If they sent you something, send them something back. And I don't care if it's a $150 difference. Never let it die in your court. And if everyone can just go back and forth enough, eventually we're going to find a middle ground. But you'll be shocked at how many deals die for like $1,000 difference on a $300,000 house. And it's just like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, get your client to do something. If we can just keep inching towards each other, we'll eventually hit something in the middle ground. But I always, this buyer wrote this offer, wrote this TRR. They're serious enough to put earnest down and spend money on inspections. We owe it to counter. Let's even if we come back $100, maybe they'll come back, right? And so we just always try to never let it die in our court. Always try to counter and come back, because we're always going to close the gap. Utilize home warranties as a tool. A lot of people put home warranties in their offer. I never really do. I kind of feel like it's just like any insurance. It's probably going to be a waste of money, right? Insurance companies wouldn't have the tallest building in every downtown and have stadiums named after them if they didn't make a ton of money, right? Insurance is a gamble. You hope you never need it. The probability is that you won't need it, but you're still paying for it, right? So home warranties are no different. And just like any insurance, it doesn't cover a lot of the stuff that's probably going to happen most often, right? So I don't like to ask for home warranties unless there's something that indicates I'm probably going to need it. So, for example, if we're inspecting it and the hot water tank is 15 years old, but it's working, but it's got some calcium buildup, it's all this stuff, but it's working. Can't really ask a seller to fix something that's working or replace something that's working, right? So that's what I always tell my clients. It's hard. It's going to be hard to get a seller to fix something that's working. So what we can do is mitigate our risk by getting a home warranty. Because if there's something in that house that has a higher probability of breaking in the next year, well, then a home warranty is not much of a risk, right? Because it's probably going to break in the next year. But if everything's fine, home warranty is a big waste of money, I think. My first house, I bought a home warranty because the HVAC was like 19 years old. And I'm thinking it's going to go out for sure in the next year. Didn't go out. I renewed the home warranty because I thought it's going to go out again. Didn't go out. Third year, renewed it. Now I've got a 22-year-old heating and air unit that won't go out, and I've spent $1,500 on home warranties over the past. Yeah. Well, I moved. Luckily, I moved, but I stopped it that year and it didn't. And then when I moved, but the guy moved in and was like, "I want you to replace home warranty or the thing." I'm like, "I'm not going to replace it because it works fine. We've put some new stuff in the condenser." But I said, I'll buy you a home warranty. So bought him a home warranty. I don't know, probably went out. I don't know, maybe not. But if there's stuff that's old, a home warranty is a good way to mitigate that. Because if it breaks in the first year, yeah, okay, maybe we should have done something about that. But if it breaks in year 2, 3, 4, 5, that's just the cost of home ownership. That's not my fault anymore. You bought the house. But if it breaks in year 1, that was foreseeable. Typically, is how I explain it to my clients and my buyers and sellers. So if something's old but working, a home warranty is a good way to overcome that in a negotiation. What was the other thing I talked about earlier? Cash in lieu of closing is typically a super easy way, because if we've got 5, 6, 7 things on a TRR and maybe closings in like 8 days, sometimes it's tough to get things squeezed in, pushed in, and that's where corners get cut That's where mistakes happen. So sometimes it's easy to say, hey, we want these things, but we've got our people and this is the bid we have. Why don't we just get X dollars in closing costs or X dollar credit or whatever it might be to the vendor, and then we take on the repair after closing. I think that's typically a better way to do it. One, you're going to meet closing more often. Two, the buyer gets to pick who they want to do it, verify it's done properly. The risk of something not getting fixed right or fixed, it kind of falls on the buyer at that point, but you've got more control to make sure it's done correctly. So cash in lieu of closing is typically one of the better ways to negotiate these items. But again, uncle might be a plumber, so I'm going to have my uncle do the plumbing. I don't want to give you money because he'll do it for me at cost, right? Or what? All kinds of stuff happens. You want to get creative in a TRR negotiation process. But home warranties are a good way to mitigate some stuff, and then cash in lieu of closing is a good way to kind of just grease the deal a little bit and get it closed quicker and kind of get everyone satisfied. It's a way you can half negotiate an item, right? So if I tell you to replace the electrical panel, that's a $1,200, $1,500 thing. I don't want to do that. I'll give you $800 towards it, though. Okay, I can live with that. So it's a way you can split items in half sometimes as cash in lieu of closing. So that's normally going to be, last 2 years I was in production, 80% of my TRRs were negotiated cash in lieu of repairs. So it's just an easier, quicker, typically way to get a deal negotiated. But again, I like to make sure everyone knows what we're asking for first, then we switch to a cash in lieu. And that's a conversation I have on the phone. Because I see people used to, I don't know if they still do, put in the TRR, I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fixed, or buyer will accept $10,000 in cash in lieu of repairs. So they're kind of doing it, but again, I think that looks like a money grab. So what I do is put what we want, call before I send it and say, hey, this is why we're doing this, blah, 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 blah. But I know might push closing a little bit if we did it all. So if the seller wanted to do some kind of cash in lieu, I think buyer might be open to that too. So I plant the seed and then I let it go. And then I come back later and say, hey, why don't we just do this instead like we talked about? That's kind of how I do that whole, but cash in lieu is a good way to kind of negotiate. That's it, that's the last one. Any questions? Okay. Okay.
That was really good, bro.
This is a very dynamic, tricky process. And so the more resourceful you are as an agent, the easier these processes will be. But setting expectations up front is the number one thing to making your job easier on the back end. So have to have these conversations up front. And then when you're going through TRR stuff, again, like talk to us, talk to the trainers, me, Christina, whoever else who's gone through a bunch of TRRs, and you just see there's different tricks and tips and different things you can do to kind of sidestep and navigate different things. So, all right, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.